Hey guys, welcome back. Imagine this. You die as the strongest swordsman in the entire kingdom, and the next moment, you open your eyes as a tiny prince with your full power still inside you. But when you try to live a normal life, your former disciple suddenly appears and says, I've come to get you. Everything's about to spiral out of control again. The story begins. Many years ago, during battle, the holy swordsman Breeze recalled the fierce wind rushing across the battlefield and the sword filled with rage. He asserted that beasts did not need armor, but only fangs to break bones and tear flesh. In his opinion, that was sufficient. The young man imagined himself as Breeze, the holy swordsman, a lone beast. He was reborn as a child who could not even cut a piece of meat. In the past, he was Breeze, but now he was Elmi Oldingham. He lived with his father and mother in a large palace. Once, sitting at the table, he puffed over the meat, which he could not cut. Focusing on this, he wondered to himself, since when do nobles eat such tough meat? If he had his former strength, he would have chopped it into pieces. The boy remembered how he had spent most of his life on the battlefield and how his enemies called him the Demon Sword. Elmi was a mercenary who had been honored with the title of State Sword. Elmi fondly remembered how his former name was pronounced. Although most of his life consisted of violence and bloodshed, he still enjoyed it. Once again, Elmi realized that he had died and been reborn into the body of a child. Because of his memories of his past life, he couldn't control his power properly. Sitting at the table with a serious expression, he listened to the reproaches that no matter how old he became, Oldingham would remain a mongrel. Opposite the boy, on his right, sat the first prince, Leonard, and on his left, the second prince, Alan. Leonard spoke discontentedly about the boy's dissimilarity to his own brother. Alan, with pity on his face, asked Leo to leave Elmi alone. In Alan's opinion, the fact that he had at least stopped eating with his hands was already a breakthrough. When asked if he was okay, the boy chewed his food resentfully, his mind filled with the desire to punch those insolent faces. Noticing his son's expression, his father encouraged him by saying that things weren't so bad. Smiling, his father asked his son if he remembered how the sword Master Breeze ate. In response, Elmi looked at his father with admiration. His father shared a story about the master's unforgettable meal. Once, he even cut a plate in half. Hearing about this incident, the boy became angry because it was in his past life. Addressing him not as his father, but as Kilpis, Elmi angrily ordered him to stop embarrassing him in front of the children, forgetting that they knew nothing about his past life. Kilpis, either not hearing him or not understanding the meaning of his words, asked again. Coming to his senses, Elmi waved him off. Nothing, father. It turns out that in a previous life, while Breeze was cutting across the battlefields, the young King Kilpis Oldingham ascended the throne. Elmi could not have imagined that in this life, Kilpis would become his father. Continuing the conversation, Alan summed up. The sword master was a commoner, and added about the difficulty of learning to wield not only a sword, but also cutlery. With anger on his face, the head of the family turned his head toward Leo and forbade him to speak so disrespectfully about the dead. After listening to such speeches from those present, Elmi drew conclusions about the king's behavior. He believed that the king pretended to be elegant, but did not have a shred of nobility. His only hobby was to belittle others and enjoy it. Recalling the past era, the boy insisted that such people were, at best, simple knights. He was sorry to see such disgusting behavior from the nobility. Realizing how pointless it was to spend time defending the kingdom with such a king, he felt very sad. Surprisingly, Queen Alina Oldingham intervened in the conversation. She confirmed the king's words and suggested that they eat together. The head of the family agreed with his wife and added that they should support each other instead of arguing. Alan apologized. Elmi looked at her kindly and thought about how good she was, because even her older brothers didn't argue with her, but at the same time, she was the one who annoyed him the most. One day, Elmi announced his desire to learn how to wield a sword. In response, his mother made a shocked expression and gasped. Hugging her son tightly, she said it was unacceptable. She declared that he didn't need it, and that if he got hurt, she wouldn't be able to bear it. Burying his face in his mother's shoulder, Elmi was annoyed by her excessive concern. Clenching his fists, his soul screamed that he was born to hold a sword. With great effort, he managed to get a private fencing instructor. His hands and heart remembered how he cut through the battlefield with a sword in his hand. In one of the fights with his private instructor, the sword flew out of the teacher's hand. He did not expect such superiority and shouted about Elmi's genius. Lying on the grass, the instructor closed his eyes and asked himself if these were really just children's games. At that moment, Elmi continued to stand and wanted his mother to do something about it. Gritting his teeth, he longed to train with the sword again. He calmed down abruptly. His mother stroked his head and admired him. But in Elami's mind, his life was boring. He felt like a bird locked in a cage. Seeing this, Leonard became angry. It infuriated him that his mother spent more time with his younger brother. Then the maid came and reminded Her Majesty of the time she needed to devote to her royal duties. With a gasp, the lady told him to behave himself and left. Exhaling, Elamy was happy to have his freedom back. But then he heard someone call him a rat. With a smirk on his face, Leonard approached him and said that if he wanted to wield a sword so badly, why not hide his identity and enroll in the Knight Academy, a private school for promising young knights? Elamy's eyes lit up. He asked for more information. Elamy asked if such a school really existed, to which he was reproached with the question. Didn't he even know that? Leo added that at the night school, swords were the most important part of the curriculum. His father had founded it this year. Leo pointed out the benefits. They would be happy not to see his pathetic face, and he would be able to train with swords like a barbarian. Despite all this, the young man doubted his ability to wield a sword if he couldn't even cut meat. After hearing the suggestion, Elamy emphasized what a good idea it was. Elamy thought about how royal studies were underway in the palace, so the members of the royal family had not yet attended school, but this school. He did not have time to think further, as his thoughts were interrupted by Leo. He asked him about the seriousness of implementing this. In response, Elamy confirmed and thanked his brother. Taking off his cat ear headband, Elamy said menacingly that thanks to this, he would no longer have to put up with his brother's stupid faces and pretend to be nice. With a horrified grimace, Leo asked briefly, "Huh?" In response, he got the same from his younger brother, after which Leo made the same sound again. Upon hearing this news, Alina Oldingham clung to her son and wailed. Hysterically, the woman screamed that she did not agree with this. The Reincarnated Academy is a general education school, which means that it offers education from elementary to high school. If he enrolls there, he will not be able to return to the palace for 10 years. To calm his mother down somehow, Elamy mentioned visiting during the holidays. The woman still refused. Kilpis, watching this, simply remained silent. At night, entering Kilpis's office, Elamy asked if he called him. Getting straight to the point, the head of the family gave his permission for him to study at the Knight Academy. Kilpis expressed his unwillingness for Elamy to be like his brothers. He believed that the closed environment of the palace had spoiled them. The father understood perfectly well the difficulty of hiding one's identity, but he relied on his son's knowledge. The boy asked a question about the certainty of what had been said. Kilpis mentioned the sword master to convince him. Everyone laughed at him because he did not belong to any school. They called him the reincarnation of a beast that crawls on the ground, licks mud, and devours corpses. Elamy was shocked, but Oldingham continued his story. Despite all the ridicule of his sword technique, he saved the kingdom. The king told him to become a man, like the sword master Breeze. With a puppy dog look, the son turned to his father, wanting to say something, but after the word father, he fell silent. He couldn't wait to say that he was the sword master. Even Kilpis, who calmly maintained friendships regardless of rank and status, did not understand that Elamy was Breeze himself. At the same time, the boy knew that, considering his appearance, there was nothing surprising about this. Folding his arms and smiling, Kilpis continued his story. Breeze destroyed the ancient and ossified forms that had become attached to fencing. Although the nobility did not admit it, the king believed that he alone had advanced the history of sword mastery. It was Breeze who saved their country. Turning to his son, he said that it was better not to. In the king's opinion, everyone who lives in this country should live like Breeze. This makes their nation strong. That is why the king erected so many statues of this hero. Elamy was puzzled. In his mind, he asked to stop creating so many doubles. Finishing the story, his father told him not to worry about his mother. He intended to tell her the news himself. Elamy thanked him. Meanwhile, spring had arrived in the capital, Galliot. As she saw him off, Miss Alina spoke of the danger and need to hire a bodyguard. Happy to be leaving, Elamy explained the ban. If his origins were revealed, he would immediately become a target. Crying loudly, his mother shouted at him that if things got difficult, he should come back immediately. Elamy spent the journey deep in thought. He decided to take the entrance exam for the Royal Knight Academy in the academic city of Reen. It was a general education school, so there were applicants of different ages, genders, and social classes. He needed to enroll in junior high school. First, Elamy thought about the written exam. He quickly wrote this down. He asked if he could finish in hand in his work. When he handed in his work, the examiner asked him, "So fast?" But, glancing at his work, he realized that all the tasks had been solved correctly. Without listening to the examiner's comments, Elamy left the auditorium. Then, looking out of the classroom doorway, the examiner called after him and emphasized that it was his job to weed out reckless insolence like him. The teacher was infuriated by Elamy. With a wild sneer, he came up with a plan. He announced the start of the practical exam. It consisted of everyone attacking in turn. Only those who moved well would advance. Elemi noticed a female judge standing behind the teacher. She looked at him with displeasure. Elemi looked up at her and gave her a puppy dog look. Standing on the battlefield, Elemi didn't understand why she was looking at him like that. For a moment, he thought he had been exposed. But more importantly, she reminded him of someone he knew, but he couldn't remember who. Suddenly, the examiner approached him, pointed his finger in his face, and ordered him to go next. He recognized him because he had left in the middle of the exam, but he asked again if it was him. In response, Elemi looked at him wearily. Noticing this, the examiner nodded. I see. Glancing at the lady, the examiner confidently stated that Elemi was trying to make himself look good in front of her. Looking at the list, the boy was asked if he was exam number 17, Elemi Noi. The examiner added that there were rumors that he was from a baron's family. The examiner was slightly shocked, as he had never heard of this surname before. He was sure that Elemi was just a minor lord from the borderlands, as he knew all the nobles in the capital. With a bitter smile, he resigned himself to the situation and mentally resolved not to worry and to attack as he saw fit. Glaring at him angrily, Elemi was convinced of his desire to humiliate him in front of everyone. He reeked of the desire to kill. Elemi asked him if he needed to prepare. The examiner replied that although he did not look like it, he was still an instructor. Putting his hand on his head and closing his eyes, he introduced himself. His name was Lawrence Givry, and he was an instructor in the main department. The Givry family were proud capital nobles, so it was no surprise that a country bumpkin like Elemi didn't know about them. Lawrence was a true knight who had dedicated his life to the noble art of fencing. His skills were impeccable, which is why he was an instructor. Lawrence said arrogantly, "Don't underestimate him, because Elemi has no chance of winning." Elemi didn't care about his words, so he gave an affirmative answer. Under his breath, he muttered about the futility of holding back. Taking the sword in his hands, it seemed excessively light to him. This made him crave a real sword even more. With a piercing gaze, in his mind this was not just a game. His thirst for blood would not go unanswered. Continuing to stand in place, and smiling from ear to ear, Lawrence continued to tease. He asked if Elemi was afraid of him, having heard who was standing in front of him. Lawrence also advised him not to worry, because he would give him a slight advantage. Lawrence proudly insisted on failing the exam, as Elemi continued to stand. Elemi was faced with a choice. Was this what life was like? Or would he prefer to run home before Lawrence crippled him? To signal the start of the fight, Elemi took a fighting stance, holding his sword in his right hand. In Lawrence's opinion, this stance was strange. It didn't look like noble fencing, so was it a rural school? Smiling in response, Elemi replied that he would soon see. Throwing his wooden sword over his shoulder, Lawrence continued to reproach him. As he already knew, they weren't just waving sticks around here. If he gave up, he would be able to learn true, noble fencing. Summing up, he decided to see what Elemi was capable of. Trying to contain his anger, Elemi exhaled and called the examiner stupid. Not expecting to hear this, Lawrence yelled. Did he hear what he just said? Shouting, he demanded a repeat if he dared. But Elemi had no intention of doing so. He was in a mood to have some fun. Grinning, the student focused on the fight. After all, Elemi had already left the palace and the capital. He no longer needed to pretend. Running up to the enemy, he swung his sword with all his might and struck him so hard in the cheek that the enemy flew away. Elemi shifted the sword into both hands and, at the end of the fight, said, as he thought, it was easier than cutting a piece of meat. The judge approached them. This style of fencing seemed familiar to her. A middle-aged man ran up and yelled at him in anger. Due to his age, he understood him, but he had to behave as befits a knight. In a rage, he commanded, "Remember once and for all, a knight is required to know more than just how to wield a sword." Elemi tried to justify himself, but they interrupted him. Both exams were passed with flying colors, but the man could not allow him to enter the academy. That evening at the hotel, the boy sank into thought. He had done it again. Elemi had unconsciously used too much force. It turned out that Lawrence had 5 broken ribs because of him, although he had intended to break at least 2 or 3. But Elemi still believed that knights were so weak nowadays. The boy promised his family with such confidence that he would enroll and graduate from the academy with honors. Returning to the castle was not an option. Hugging his legs to his chest, he wondered about going on a journey. The disappearance of one prince would not greatly affect the kingdom. Elemi made his final decision to go on a journey. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. It was the judge. Opening the door, Elemi rudely asked what she wanted. He had already paid for his stay, and besides, he was busy with important matters. The judge wished him a good evening. When the young man realized who was standing in front of him, Elemi froze in fear. Yet he had a feeling that she reminded him of someone. Elemi asked again what she wanted. If she had come to inform him that he had not been accepted into the academy, he already knew. However, something else was afoot. The teacher sternly recited his number, first name, and last name, and explained that she had come for him. His eyes widened. That voice. Elemi remembered who she had reminded him of all this time. In his past life, during his adventures, several people had decided to follow him. One of them was a small, thin figure, like a puppy, who constantly followed him into the thick of battle. His last student. Entering the room, the teacher apologized and introduced herself. Her name was Lilia Tuka, exactly the same as the name of Breeze's last student. This year, she had been appointed as a senior instructor at the night school. Elemi had a sudden realization. He shouted her name as if he had known it for a long time. For this, the boy got a slap on the head. Lily demanded to be called Ituka Sensei. To reinforce this, Elemi said her name again. In return, he received praise. Elemi came to his senses. He was no longer Breeze. He would never have thought he would meet her here. She used to be a little crybaby, a girl like her had no place on the battlefield. But Lily had grown up so much. Ituka Sensei gave the order to gather their things and follow her. The carriage was already waiting for them below. Elemi asked where they were going. They replied that they were going to the dormitory of the Reen Academy of Knights. No sooner had he entered the dormitory than he found himself squeezed between three women's breasts. They pounced on him, saying, "How cute he is." The girls wondered if she was their age. One of the girls theorized that she was someone's sister or that she was a boy. Another denied this. Since she was here, she was definitely a girl. Men were not allowed here. Finding himself too close to one of the girls' breasts, Elemi wondered why he had been brought to the girls. The night school had separate dormitories for men and women. They were connected by a bridge, but entering the opposite dormitory was strictly forbidden. One of the girls suggested checking it out. Another replied that anything was possible. Clapping their hands, they set to work. But then Ituka came in. She had only left for a second, and now this was happening. Pulling the poor guy close to her, she ordered them to stop. Then Ituka ordered everyone to go to their rooms, as it was time to sleep. The girls nodded in agreement and left. When everyone had left, Elemi addressed her, referring to her as Lily. In response, she asked him once again not to call her that. On his second attempt, he managed to address her correctly and finally asked his question. Why was he in the girls' dormitory? Elemi thought about failing the exam. Why had he been brought here? Ituka Sensei explained to him that he had not been admitted to the next stage of the exam, but because of his outstanding knowledge and physical abilities, he was allowed to join the upper class. During the next stage of the exam, the boy could seriously injure other students, so an exception was made. Everything became clear to Elemi. He understood that thanks to his memories from his past life, he was many times stronger than his peers. As for the girls' dormitory, until recently, Ituka thought he was a girl. It turned out that Elemi was registered as a girl in the documents. He couldn't believe it. Was it a joke? The documents showed that the ink had been erased and written over, and the handwriting was different. Elemi suspected his mother of this. She must have thought that if she registered him as a girl, he would be too ashamed to come home. Besides, they had no more rooms available for boys. At the academy, the number of students accepted depends on the number of rooms available. So there was no room left for Elemi, who had been accepted as an exception. If one of the male students died or dropped out, he would move in. Elemi smiled in agreement. But in his mind, if a male student died, his ghost would remain in the room. Elemi decided to ask one more question. If he refused, would he have to sleep on the street? He received an affirmative answer. Exhausted, he closed his eyes for a second and rested his hand on his forehead. When he opened his eyes, Elemi caught Lily's gaze. He asked her why she was looking at him like that. She replied that Elemi reminded her of the legendary Swordsman Breeze. Elemi must have heard of him. However, Elemi was that swordsman. Lily knew about his past life, just as he knew hers. He felt uncomfortable that she saw him in such a pitiful state. Even if he told her, she wouldn't believe him. Knowing his grades, Ituka asked him, "Surely he reads documents at that age?" Elemi confirmed this. He knew about him from historical reports. Lily was surprised. When she was his age. At that moment, Elemi remembered the past again. Lily fought on the battlefield, following him like a puppy, trying to repeat techniques, killing enemies, fighting for survival, even after losing her teacher. At that moment, Elemi wondered, how did he die? However, the dormitory was more important now. If he were younger, he might have liked it, but unfortunately, his mind was like that of an old man. Compared to these young girls, he liked Lily more. But Breeze had been watching over her since childhood, which was unthinkable. To him, she was nothing more than a student. The girls began to disperse to their rooms and wish Lily good night. Ituka asked not to be called that. Responding with a yes, Lily asked her to answer normally twice. Walking further down the corridor, Elemi asked her how many people she had managed to befriend. Ituka denied it. They had met yesterday. She seemed to be something of a celebrity because of her achievements during the war against the Republic. Upon learning this, Elemi was upset. It turned out that after his death, she had fought, but she should have stopped, as she was a girl. Continuing the conversation, Lily shocked him with important news. King Kilpis wanted to make her the second legendary sword. Shocked, Elemi asked again, but she refused, as she was still far from Breeze. To avoid unnecessary attention, she left the army immediately after the peace treaty with the Republic was signed. Listening to all this, he became more and more surprised. She had achieved so much after his death. Then the king asked her to train the next generations. Thus, by his decree, Lily ended up at this school. Elemi became angry. Because of this stubborn old man, his student was suffering. Ituka continued her story. Rumors that she had gone from being a soldier to a teacher spread quickly. So now everyone knows her, and that was comfortable for her. Suddenly, Elemi apologized. Not understanding why, Ituka asked him a question. But the topic quickly changed as they approached their destination. Upon entering, Elemi was shocked. Ituka informed him that from now on, this was his room. The rooms in the women's dormitory were quite comfortable. Walking along the room, Elemi discovered women's underwear hanging by the window. Noticing this, he made a sound that conveyed a question. Noticing this, Lily said that it was not what he thought. It was her underwear. Elemi did not understand the meaning of her words. Sitting down on the bed, Lily announced that he would be living with her in the same room. For Elemi, this was wrong, but he didn't know how he had gotten this place. Entering the ward where Lawrence was lying sick, she listened to many reproaches. Elemi was called a rat who had used a dirty trick to defeat Lawrence. His actions contradicted the spirit of chivalry. Lily asked them to wait, as she had seen everything that had happened. After looking at her, the chief agreed. If the king's messenger asked, they couldn't refuse, but there were no free rooms either. He chuckled and continued. If there are no free rooms, then he will have nowhere to sleep and will not be able to pass. Then the girl announced that Elemi would be staying with her, so he would have to put up with it for a while. Clenching his fists, Elemi shouted his disagreement with living like this. But thank God, those were just his thoughts. If he had said so out loud, he would have had to wander the streets. Looking at the girl, he saw a huge difference between Lily and Ituka. Lily had been so small and skinny in her previous life. The girl had grown a lot during that time. Addressing her as Lily, she once again ordered him to call her instructor Ituka. Addressing her correctly, he became interested in whether she was married, so he asked her directly without hesitation. He received a negative answer. After thinking it over, he still didn't quite understand. He could address her informally, but not call her Lily? In his mind, he had already told Ituka that she was getting old and that she should stop wasting her time on these silly fights. He should have asked one of his senior students to marry her. Sitting in a room, Elemi read a lecture about the impropriety of an unmarried girl living with a man. In retaliation, she replied that it would be strange if she had a son like him. With eyes wide with shock, Elemi asked the same question again. Moving a little closer, a blush appeared on his face. He was trying to convey something completely different to her. It wasn't what she thought. Elemi shouted about his manhood and asked her, how could she not be concerned about this? Lily froze, worried that she had missed her chance to get married. Elemi shouted at her to stop talking nonsense. Elemi came to his senses. He wasn't Lily's father. Still in shock, Ituka expressed her gratitude for his concern and asked him not to worry. Elemi agreed with Ituka's opinion. Right now, he couldn't even defeat Lily without a weapon. Putting her hand on her heart and beaming with joy, Ituka added the age difference to all this. To Elemi, she was old. She was 25 years old. Gritting his teeth, Elemi couldn't wait to snide that he was still older than her. Seeing his dissatisfied grimace, Ituka, with her sweet face, pointed out how funny his face looked. Putting his anger aside, Elemi thought about it. Why was he getting so worked up about this? Lily was right after all. He didn't see her as a woman, so he would just act cool, like a real man. The girl didn't notice how quickly time had flown by, and it was already time to sleep, so she gave orders to wash up and go to bed. She also suggested lying down on a huge bed with stuffed animals. Elemi wondered if Ituka would sleep. She, in turn, had some things to finish. With a frown on his face, Elemi warned Ituka not to overdo it. If she doesn't get enough sleep, she won't get stronger, no matter how much she trains. A childhood memory flashed through the girl's mind. Breeze had said exactly the same words to her as this boy had said. A second later, Elemi realized what he had said. In his mind, Lily was already a mature 25-year-old woman, while he was only a 10-year-old child. How long would it take him to grow up? Anyway, he apologized for his mistake. With a sweet look on her face, Ituka first answered yes, then no. Elemi still didn't understand which of these answers was correct. Watching her write something intently at the table, he remembered the same face when she was little. She had always been so serious. In a previous life, one day, standing above the people, Breeze read a speech. The girl stood behind him and listened attentively. If they strive to improve their skills, they must observe the styles of others and incorporate this into practice. The main thing is to hold the sword firmly and not let go of it while the enemy is still breathing. They must not stop until the very end. If they decide to give up, growl and cheer themselves on. If the enemy is formidable, let them cut his flesh and break his bones. Only then will your fangs achieve life. The most important thing is to live. It doesn't matter how. The main thing is to survive. That was all Breeze could teach his students. Analyzing his words, Breeze was nothing but gibberish. But despite this, countless knights laughed at them as if they were pathetic beasts. All of his students survived. They were his pride and joy, left behind in his previous life. His students took many lives, but saved many more. Elemi understood how hard it was for the girl, so he suddenly praised her, only in the body of another person. Ituka didn't understand right away and asked a question. In response, she heard Elemi's denial. He lay down on the bed, thinking about the uncomfortable position. Ituka recommended moving the toys to the edge. He didn't know that was possible. Sitting on the bed, he began to examine the head of a teddy bear lying on the bed. Lost in thought, he didn't realize one thing. If she liked such things, she could have simply asked for them in her previous life. During her lifetime, Breeze was only able to give her one thing, but now he regretted it. He had taken so much from her life. For example, the opportunity to get married. Following the sensei's recommendation, Elemi asked about the evaluation. Then Ituka asked him to move over. As he continued working, she made a condition. If the boy lay down in the middle, then there would be no room left for the sensei. At first, Elemi agreed, but then he snapped. How did she even decide that they would sleep together? The girl calmly explained, of course it's a little cramped, but we just need to be patient until they bring a new bed. As for herself, she said not to worry because she liked cute things. Elemi was horrified. What cute things? So they think he's some kind of toy? Angrily, the boy barked that he would sleep on the floor. After a while, Ituka came over and picked him up from the floor. Half asleep, he didn't understand what was going on. Then the girl apologized and asked if she had woken him up. Ituka sensei couldn't let the child sleep on the floor. He could get sick. So that night, he had to sleep with her in the same bed. It was useless to resist. As he was being carried, his eyes bulged in surprise. He continued to resist and demanded that she not even think of saying such a thing. Breeze didn't remember teaching anything like that. The girl giggled at his reaction and remembered that when she was younger, she used to say the same thing. Sitting down on the bed, Ituka told him the story of how a man had brought her to a hotel. Stunned by what he heard, Elemi couldn't believe his ears. When she was 10 years old, this man undressed her and she couldn't even resist. The man poured water on her and gave her light clothes. Then he threw her on the bed. Surprised, Elemi asked again. However, Ituka forgot to mention that in the end, he did nothing to her. The man picked her up, washed her, and washed her clothes. He let her sleep in his bed, but did nothing to her. He simply provided her with a warm place to sleep out of the kindness of his heart. Closing his eyes, Elemi guessed who it was. It was him, Breeze. Come to think of it, he really did do that. Breeze forcibly undressed and washed this grumpy girl. Since he only had one room, he made her sleep with him. So, the whole situation was his fault? Elemi thought about it and realized that he had clearly lacked tact. Feeling guilty, the boy apologized, pretending to be Breeze. But Ituka didn't tell him that it was Breeze. How could he have known? It was a mystery to the girl. Elemi let out a gasp of shock and justified himself. She was his student. He just guessed because Breeze looked like a tactless jerk. After listening to him, she confirmed his words. To her, he was rude, careless, and reckless. Elemi was ready to cry when he heard this confession. He understood how far he had gone. Poking him in the forehead with her finger, she assured him that she was his little student, so she would do the same as her teacher. The boy couldn't run away, so he didn't need to worry. All his fears and doubts were already gone, and this was just ordinary kindness. Lying next to each other on the shared bed, they struck up a conversation. Calling her Lily, he verbally convinced her that he believed her. She corrected him again to Ituka sensei. Elemi immediately realized what he had said. Mentally, it was difficult for him to get used to it. With a smile on her face, Ituka compared the two men. In fact, Elemi and Breeze were similar. Rough, carefree, and reckless. The only difference between them was their age. Her inner child's voice grumbled at her analysis. They were the same person. The girl regretted the time that could not be returned. She wanted to spend more time with him. Eternity. Elemi thought about it. He presented her with a theory. Choosing between a girl and stupid swords, Breeze would definitely choose her. And their age difference was like that of a father and daughter, or maybe even more. Ituka didn't care about these formalities. She didn't care what this relationship had turned into, whether it was marriage or a father-daughter relationship. In the end, they were like the formless sword. With her eyes wide open, a flood of questions flashed through Elami's mind. Did he understand, then, what Lily thought of him? Was she thinking of him at that very moment? He was maddened by not understanding exactly how he had died. Once, walking across a bridge together among the trees and thick grass, Lily simply wanted Breeze to live longer. Even if their relationship had no form, the girl wanted to be with him. However, she had no strength left. Moving forward, Lily tried to catch up with him, but her hand could not reach him. No matter how fast Lily ran, she couldn't even touch him with her fingertips. Because he was gone, very far away. Turning onto her right side and wrapping herself in a blanket, the girl continued. She didn't need a husband or children. Lily could have come to terms with anything, but not this. Turning on his left side, Elami fell into deep sadness. Regrets arose in his thoughts. Breeze was already dead, and no matter how much she wanted to, Lily could not become his wife. Clenching the sheet in her fist, she decided to stop talking about it. She declared that he no longer needed to hear it. She decided not to continue, but still, even if she weren't his daughter. Burying his face in the pillow, Elami had no intention of listening. Moments flashed through his mind. How Lily stood there, tears streaming down her face, barely managing to squeeze out the words that she just wanted to be part of the Breeze family. Lifting her small head with his huge hand, he said that all these guys, including himself, were her family. It took a set after that, just as he had said. Without listening to her words, Elami quietly choked back tears. Elami's heart was heavy. He was no longer Breeze, and there was nothing he could do for Ituka. Clenching his hands, the boy prayed to God to erase Lily's memories of his former life and make her happy. Late at night, sitting on the roof of the school, one of the students was looking forward to classes. They were starting tomorrow. In the morning, Elami had barely opened his eyes when he found himself sitting in a split on the floor. At that moment, the sensei stood behind him and silently watched the scene. Unexpectedly, the girl asked if his parents knew about Breeze. Elami jumped up in fear at what he heard. Ituka asked him how he was feeling. Feeling somewhat embarrassed, Elami replied that he had a normal hiccup. Putting her hands on her hips, the sensei gave him a recommendation. If he hit his diaphragm with all his strength, the hiccups would stop. For greater effect, the sensei showed him her fist. But she still considered it a scary home remedy and became curious about what the boy thought about it. It turned out that Breeze had taught her this. But Elami didn't remember him teaching her this in the past. Maybe he was drunk? Elami didn't understand why Ituka thought it had something to do with Breeze. Then the girl noticed his stretching exercises. Breeze did the same. The boy panicked but tried to explain. He told her about the chapter in the book that described his routine. He said that if they were following the path of swords, there was no way to avoid reading about it. Ituka, amazed, asked if his words were true and what the name of the book was. Elami apologized and said he didn't remember. She felt a little sad about this and sat down next to him in a longitudinal split. Pronouncing the first two letters of her former name, he asked her if she also did all his stretching exercises. Sitting there, Ituka replied that, as his last student, she should at least follow his teachings. Elami mentally responded to this statement. He hadn't taught her that. She had repeated everything after him herself. Ituka added another similarity. She noticed something familiar in Elami Breeze. The great swordsman also swung his sword foolishly, just as Elami had done during his practical exam. The boy replied that he was repeating after Breeze, just as the sensei herself did. Ituka asked uncertainly, could it be that? But it still seemed strange to her. Although his face, voice, and age were not the same as his, Elami resembled his last student more than she did. That's why she became curious. Could this be his child? Elami got angry and said that it was unnecessary to joke like that. In his anger, he swore. In his opinion, he was not at all like this old man with a stony face. Lily laughed. She laughed after hearing this. Breeze's face reminded her of a potato, especially when they first met. Back then, the great swordsman had frightened her. The girl laughed again. At that moment, Elami looked at her with eyes full of love. She laughed just as she had before, and he remembered her childish smile. In high school, in classroom 1-1, the holy swordswoman Lily Ituka entered the main hall. Everyone looked at her and couldn't take their eyes off her. She looked like a warrior princess. Elami stood at the main entrance and asked himself deeply. He was curious how much commotion she had caused while he was a failure. She was different from what the students had imagined. They thought she would have broad shoulders like Breeze. Approaching the students, Lily introduced herself and announced the news. From that day on, she would be teaching their class. Like all newcomers, the girl was not very familiar with school life, but she hoped to establish contact. Before leaving for class, she introduced everyone to Elemi, a 10-year-old boy who had been transferred to the upper grades because of his mental and physical abilities. Even though he was the youngest, it took a demanded that everyone treat him well. From the very first days, Elemi decided to act arrogantly. He stood in the middle of the classroom and shouted haughty words to the older students about how he was counting on them. The teacher sat Elemi at the first desk, adding that everyone else was seated in order of their entrance exam scores. The next day, a seat would be chosen especially for him. Disrespectfully drawing attention to himself, Elemi shouted, "Hey!" He was immediately corrected. However, he continued to rage and ask why only he had been given such a seat. Elemi did not demand special treatment because he had skipped several grades, especially if Ituka is going to teach. Lily was stunned by such audacity. Still, the girl didn't lose her composure and gave him an answer. She said he was just being mean and that it wasn't a special attitude. Elemi immediately blushed. He felt embarrassed. The whole class burst out laughing. Everyone shouted in unison how cute it was. Every morning, while adjusting his clothes, Elemi insisted that everyone should drink milk every day as it strengthens bones and helps them grow faster. Elemi loudly protested that this advice was unnecessary. When it came to studying, Elemi couldn't use his memories from the past. It would be suspicious. At the same time, he couldn't fall behind. While he was reading a book and analyzing it, a girl approached him. She wished him a good day and expressed her delight at meeting him. She called him over to her several times. He asked her impatiently what she wanted from him. Leaning on the desk, the girl suggested they team up. Elemi didn't understand what she was talking about. Suddenly, she pushed him against the wall and whispered for him to be quiet. She called him over again. She shared some info that Elemi didn't get at first. The student was talking about some secret that no one knew about yet. Standing by the wall, Elemi listened carefully. The student compared that, unlike in middle and high school, in night high school, real combat practices were included in the curriculum. Elemi was afraid of her and tried not to speak, but he still asked if she meant fencing practice. But then, if the entrance exams were to be believed, students would be introduced to real swords in elementary school. His words made the girl pause for a moment. Then the student pointed to real battles and said that it was not about practice at all. With a serious expression on his face and gesturing with his hands, he asked her seriously if she was thinking of going into battle. It was ridiculous of her to think that. The girl rejected this assumption. She was referring to the dungeon program. Elemi asked again. Continuing to smile, the student explained the secret that no one could tell. Bringing her index finger to her face, she revealed the details to him. The goal was to defeat the monsters in the explored dungeons and ensure the safety of the surrounding areas. This was already an official statement. However, this statement had not yet been introduced in other schools. Elemi asked again. The student confirmed. She brought her hands together and cheerfully babbled about the joy of expecting a child who had skipped several grades. Capturing dungeons was what knights originally did. Amateurs were dismissed immediately without being allowed to do anything. In special cases, monsters could guard the treasures there. There is a story about a dragon who flew into a rage when his treasures were stolen while he was sleeping. The dragon burned an entire people to ashes. After those two incidents, people in every country stopped stealing treasures. Instead, they sealed the entrance to prevent thieves from entering. However, such measures depend on how strong the monsters found are. In addition, this task began to be entrusted to the knightly order. Elemi found it hard to believe that such an important task was entrusted to students. But what if the dungeon program was hidden even in the tickets? However, there is a high probability that the girl's words are true. Or maybe the Reen Knight School had high expectations. Or maybe the Knight Order didn't have enough people. Why would countries go to such lengths to explore the dungeons? They had already contributed to the development of nations in the past. Despite the danger, they were also a national treasure. There were many things in the dungeons, a map of unexplored territories beyond the continent, recognizing new places, a scroll of advanced spells, a legendary book of tactics, a treasure that surpasses other weapons, previously unseen minerals, just exterminating monsters. Elemi found this activity interesting. In his understanding, it was a great opportunity to test his weak body. However, he did not need to be held back. There was one more question he had for the student, which he asked. Why did she want to team up with him specifically? Elemi had no desire to team up with anyone because he wanted to act freely. To elicit pity, Elemi made himself look innocent and defenseless, and to refuse, he feigned arrogance. He played on her pity by saying that he would be a burden and that she shouldn't inconvenience herself. He told the girl about his assumption of loneliness and how sad it would be. Elemi was instantly pinned against the wall. The girl smiled and spoke to dispel his doubts. Instructor Lawrence was killed during the practical exam, wasn't he? Shouting at the top of his lungs, he yelled for them to stop spreading false information. The student calmly told him not to shout. Elemi still asked her how she found out about it. The answer was simple: at the exam site. Throwing herself into his arms, the student changed the subject. Emphasizing his kind behavior and abilities, she insisted once again on uniting. Becoming serious, Elemi was convinced of the girl's sound reasoning. During their embrace, Elemi had a different opinion on the matter. Subconsciously, she was talking nonsense to him in order to match his age or make him lose his guard. Elemi sensed deception and felt it was unnecessary to engage with her. Pulling away first, Elemi clearly stated the futility of his usefulness. Realizing his unwillingness to get involved with her, she gasped and asked about his true nature. With an ominous smile, she spoke of usefulness, because she knew that Elemi was hiding something, blackmailing him with this. She looked at him with an ominous grin, sticking to him with eyes of madness. She said that if he didn't want to, he didn't have to tell her, but he should know what would happen for it. Not succumbing to her provocation, he reasoned that she couldn't have known about his rebirth. That option was immediately ruled out. So, it was obvious that he was a member of the royal family. If people found out, it could turn into an event that would affect the entire school. Teachers would start treating him differently. Elemi came to Reen Academy to hone his fencing skills in harsh conditions. In that case, it would be pointless. Shouting curses, the boy nevertheless approved the union and asked for confirmation of his consent. The student happily agreed. In that case, she decided to introduce herself. In fact, they had already been introduced in class, and she reminded him of this, but Elemi did not remember. It turned out that the girl did not remember either, but it was him she remembered because she liked him. There were only 4 girls in the class, and she insisted that he must remember her. Elemi objected. Unfortunately, he was still a child and had no sensuality whatsoever. Laughing, she touched his nose with her finger. With a smile of joy, she commented that children don't call themselves children, in case he didn't know. He already sounded like a grown man. With a frown, Elemi introduced himself and said to call him whatever she wanted. The girl's name was Mika Ornheim. Elemi was taken aback and asked in admiration if her grandfather was the venerable Mardo Ornheim. Everything turned out to be true, except that Mardo was her father, not her grandfather. Ornheim is a margrave who rules a defensive city near the border with the Republic of Egel. His strong order of knights is trained in the mountains and, surprisingly, moves quickly. He held the defense against the Republic without taking a single step back. He also commands sorcerers who can suddenly appear and disappear. The cruel General Mardo Ornheim. Elemi had been in contact with him in the past, and even if he is alive, he is already about 70 years old and has a fairly young daughter, which seems strange to him. With a happy face, Miku gave him the nickname Eltan. Meanwhile, Elemi was deep in thought. Mardo Ornheim and Miku seemed like 2 different people to him. Closing his eyes for a second and immediately opening them, he summed up the situation. He decided not to think about the fact that his daughter was older than him. While the young man stood and pondered, Miku, calling him by his new nickname, asked if he was listening. Elemi assured her that he had listened. Then he told her straight out to drop all formalities and call him whatever she wanted. Following his advice, Mika decided to call him Puppy. Elemi objected, saying it would be better not to, but without arguing, he relented. Shaking hands, his new acquaintance expressed her delight at meeting him and ran off. Watching her run away and smiling after her, Elemi felt uneasy. She had revealed everything so quickly and suddenly. It was terrible. Before he had even moved away from Miku, another male voice sounded from behind him. Deciding to take it out on someone else, Elemi turned around and asked irritably what he wanted. The guy didn't understand. Then he asked why Elemi was so angry. Looking closer, the student realized it was Elemi. But just to be sure, he asked if it was him. Coming up close to him and looking down at him, he asked menacingly what Elemi had been talking to her about. At first, Elemi didn't understand who he was talking about. Then the young man told him not to play dumb and called out a painfully familiar name and surname, Mika Ornheim. He then clarified. They were chatting in the corner of the classroom, weren't they, and constantly looking back? At that moment, Elemi's face contorted. It was a secret between him and Miku. Elemi couldn't tell her, since she had something against him, and the boy was afraid of revenge. The choice was difficult, and Elemi was puzzled. Having figured out what to say, he asked, who was Miku to him? A sister? A girlfriend? And he dismissed the 10-year age difference, noting there was nothing between them, so the student should calm down. Inside, Elemi was proud of himself. In response, he was called a fool. However, the guy was no slouch either. He remarked that Elemi was different from the other children. Elemi assured him that he wasn't talking nonsense. In his opinion, there was nothing strange about the fact that he looked like a child but thought like an adult. Sensing his indifference, the young man ordered him not to take it that way. He was not interested in a relationship with a child who still had milk on his lips. This guy was already starting to annoy Elemi. Although, judging by the young man, Elemi was the only child here. Elemi decided to look at it from another angle. The fact that he had spoken to him meant that rumors about the curriculum had already spread. This guy also knew that Elemi had defeated Lawrence. Was he trying to lure him to his side? Or had he set his sights on Miku? Although it was hard to imagine such a noisy girl with someone useful. Elemi asked the young man he was talking to his name. Bringing his hand to his neck, the student introduced himself. His name was Void. Next came a question about his last name, but he replied that he didn't have one. Void decided to explain. Unlike the other noble students, he had come here from the slums of Elva. Void wasn't even a normal city dweller. He had never seen his parents. Elva is a coastal tourist town with a vibrant tourist beach and dilapidated slums inland. This place is the darkness of this world. The brighter the light outside, the darker it is inside, to the point where various unknown communities appear. Considering this fact, Elemi became curious. He didn't grow up on his own, did he? Then Void revealed his surname. The orphanage was called Scale. Void Scale. Void didn't use his surname after leaving the orphanage. The Royal Knight Academy accepts everyone regardless of status. However, it was still rare to meet commoners, let alone get in. Elemi summed up the guy's talent. In his opinion, Void might be more talented than he seems. Waving his hand and signaling his departure, Elemi turned around. Void grabbed Elemi by the shoulder and commented on his attempt to change the subject. It was a clever move. Changing his expression from irritated to calm, he said that he didn't care about Elemi and Miku's conversation. So Void simply gave some advice. As for Ms. Ornheim, Elemi should be more careful. In the dormitory, approaching the door to the room, Elemi was extremely tired and wanted to rest. Already standing on the threshold, Elemi remembered that Lily hadn't given him the key, and then, as much as it annoyed him, he had to go to the teacher's room. Suddenly, Miku appeared in his path. The girl pressed him against her and said hello. Elemi found himself face to face with her chest and then realized who he was dealing with. Miku yelled at him, calling him a pervert, and asked what he was doing. Did he do it unconsciously when he saw a pretty girl? Was that an excuse for harassment? Slightly lowering herself, she pointed out his mistake, walking on the teacher's floor. Even if he was a child, he was still a boy. Elemi refrained from answering. He couldn't let slip that he lived with Lily. Then a brilliant question came to mind. What was Mika doing here then? There were no student rooms here. The girl hesitated. Nevertheless, she found a way out. Throwing herself into Miku's arms again, she smiled and gave her answer. She explained that she had simply seen Eltan going up to it took his teacher's room and was curious about what he wanted. Elemi was extremely dissatisfied. So Miku had been following him? Keeping her smile, she told him not to say that. She had just happened to notice. Calm down, Elemi thought about it. The girl's words made sense. Perhaps it was true. It didn't seem likely that she had overheard his conversation with Void. She then said that he should come to her next time. She would always be happy to see him. She claimed that she wouldn't tell anyone and that he shouldn't worry. With her unbearable face, it was unbearable for the boy to talk to her. She annoyed him. Follow him without him noticing? Had his senses dulled? Suddenly, his brain switched to something else with a jubilant, repetitive hey hey. Even a stone from the ground, that's right. The nobles mocked Breeze. Nevertheless, that was how he defended the country. Thanks to his merits, His Royal Majesty founded a Knight Academy. Not to learn fencing, but to learn different styles of combat. During the practical lesson, Lily sternly ordered them to choose the weapon that suited them best. They could change it later. Lily thought that this would motivate them to defend the kingdom where their families lived. While choosing weapons, one of the students smirked and said that the sword was the safest. Another, still smiling, disagreed with him. He had studied this at home, and besides, the sword was beautiful and elegant. Standing away from them, Elemi thought they were naive. They would all understand after their first battle. In his mind, Elemi explained that fencing begins with the rules of demonstrations and commands. Here, it was not like on a battlefield, where the lives of those who risked themselves were brutally taken away. Half of them fell in the very first battle. Those who survived exchanged their swords for double-edged swords. From noble fencers, they turned into fierce knights. They added a stabbing blow to their slashing blow. Only then did they become worthy knights. Meanwhile, Elemi was looking for something more. Something like wild beasts or monsters, whose lives he took and to whom he brought death. incredible cruelty that could not even be called fencing. One of the students agreed with the choice of sword. Another, passing by, asked if a sword was a classic for nobles. Ituka remained silent. Watching her reaction, Elemi knew that Lily realized there was no point in saying anything to them until they experienced war firsthand. Moreover, in Elemi's opinion, it would be great if they could gain experience here rather than on the battlefield. One of the students picked up a Bundy dagger and emphasized this point. Although it was not as effective as a short sword, it would be extremely useful in both attack and defense. It was also difficult to break for those for whom combat was a flurry of blows. Elemi was puzzled by the question. Is this the standard choice for kids from the slums? Still, touching his finger to his mouth, Elemi's choice settled on this. Meanwhile, Miku chose a sword and a main dagger. Watching her choice, it was expected for Elemi. A logical choice, given the fragility, the main weakness of the sword. The main dagger is light but strong, also ideal in case the sword breaks. One of the black-haired students chose a katana. Noticing this, Elemi made a mental note to keep an eye on this guy, because a katana is a complex weapon that is difficult to handle. Meanwhile, Elemi stood in front of the weapon display case and fell into deep thought. Miku approached him and asked him about his choice. Noticing his short stature, Miku advised him to take a wooden sword, as a real one would be too heavy for him. Patting the boy on the back, Miku assured him with a positive attitude that if necessary, his older sister would protect him. Elemi angrily yelled at her not to touch him so freely. In his imagination, Elemu literally begged her not to do that in front of his former student. Elemi was worried about Lily's coldness. On top of everything else, he needed to decide quickly which weapon to take. He usually chose a long sword or katana, but his current body was not big enough. He couldn't fight the same way Breeze did. After thinking hard, he finally made a choice. Although not particularly effective, it suits his body better than heavy weapons. Two weapons were chosen, a gladius for slashing and a dagger for stabbing. Elemi considered the difficulty of using both at the same time, so he chose one for each hand. Everything would depend on how he used them. Elemi was over the moon with happiness after choosing his weapons. Ituka asked everyone present if they had made their choices. Standing at a large table near the blackboard, she announced some important information. Classes were over for the day. The official school day would begin the following day. Today, the students could rest. Everyone stood and listened. One of the students with black hair asked a question. He was interested in what was included in the curriculum. Looking at him, Ituka realized who was speaking to her. It was the foreign student Ryoka Ojin. Afraid of making a mistake, Ituka asked if it was really him. Ryoka answered in the affirmative and said that it was a great honor for him. Looking at the young man with wide eyes, Elemi couldn't believe what was happening. This was the student who had chosen the katana. Ituka wondered why it was an honor for Ryoka and asked him about it. Ryoka explained that it was a great honor for him that the renowned Lily Ituka Sensei, known as the Holy Swordswoman, had remembered his name. With empty eyes, Lily did not accept the praise from the student. She was sure that she was not as good as the swordsman Breeze. Ituka chose not to pursue the subject. Remembering the question she had been asked, she apologized, as she could not answer it. The teaching staff had been asked to keep it a secret until the curriculum began. It was an order from the principal. Elemi was stunned that the academy had a principal. This year's document said nothing about a principal. If someone had been appointed principal of the new Knight Academy, it meant that the army trusted him, and he held an important position there. Elemi guessed that it would be General Ornheim. Bending over slightly, Mika wanted to ask a question, but she didn't ask it and just smiled brightly. Noticing her behavior, Elemi refused to believe it. But there was another version. Perhaps she was just pretending not to know. Even standing upright, Ryoka remained too short in Elemi's opinion. He was taller than him, but shorter than his peers. Therefore, Elemi put forward a theory about his place of birth. Perhaps he was from the east. While he was thinking, Miku approached from behind. She quietly poked the poor boy's left side. Elemi squealed in surprise. Hearing the squeal, Ituka was frightened for the boy and asked what had happened. Elemi replied that nothing had happened and asked her to continue. Ituka gave the assignment to divide into groups of 4 by tomorrow. There are 20 students in the class, so there will be 5 groups. Ituka went on to say that it was not a suggestion or a requirement, but that physically weak girls should not form a single group. That concluded the lesson. After the class, Miku approached Elemi. The boy was curious about what the girl wanted. Miku turned his gaze to the suspicious guy, Ryoka Ojin. Leaning close to his ear, Miku asked if Elemi had heard the rumors that a foreign spy had infiltrated the school. Elemi was completely unaware of such matters and was hearing about it for the first time. However, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was true. At the Royal Knight Academy, only after graduation can one join the Royal Knight Order. Naturally, The academy is closely connected to the Knight Order. Most of the teachers are knights. Even Lawrence was a knight. Looking at the guy, Elemi immediately told her that if he were a spy, he would hide his Eastern appearance. Incidentally, Miku aroused much more suspicion. She knew about the unannounced curriculum and was much more suspicious. Miku smiled and laughed, saying that she understood. Elemi fell silent. The place north of the academy that was chosen for the curriculum. It was a dungeon. Every student was thrilled. One was happy to come to the dungeon. Another was happy that there would be more practice than theory, and a third felt like he was on a field trip. Only Elemi felt nothing. No joy, no excitement. He walked with a grim look on his face, making sure that the dungeon curriculum was not a fabrication. This dungeon had been partially explored by teachers for safety reasons. All the magical creatures were fake. They were artificial creations brought in by the subsidiary school of magic. Approaching the dungeon door, Lily turned to the students and reminded them that none of them were immune. The door swung open, and inside was pitch black. Everything up to the 3rd floor has been explored. What lies above remains unknown. The passage to the 4th floor is blocked by an iron door. As the curriculum progressed, these floors would gradually be opened. Walking through the dungeon, Lily noted the need to take all these facts into account. Walking behind Elemi, she peered into the space, thinking at the same time. Could there be real creatures on the unexplored floors? However, Elemi concluded that they would not encounter any. Finally, Ituka ordered everyone to turn on their flashlights. The training group walked along the 1st floor of the dungeon. Crouching down, Elemi noticed the sound that echoed. Based on this, the dungeon turned out to be spacious. Closing his eyes, Noi listened. Standing behind him, Miku also noticed important details. She felt as if it were a real dungeon because of the well-built staircases. Elemi agreed. There were 2 types of dungeons in the world. Natural dungeons in the form of caves and the like. Natural dungeons are useless. Only dangerous creatures live in them. There is always the risk of a new monster nest appearing. People believe that artificial dungeons were created by ancient civilizations. Metals that can be used to make weapons and armor are often found in them. However, no new grimoires have been found yet. Valuable treasures are also found there. Monsters often settled there. However, most often there were guards protecting the treasures. The treasures found are incredibly valuable. Extensive artificial dungeons can even cause wars between nations. However, it did not seem that there was much value in this dungeon. Elemi believed that it was more suitable as a training ground. The students were frightened. One was afraid because he could not see the end. Another was simply scared. But just a couple of minutes ago, they were happy about the excursion. Elemi noticed this right away, but didn't say anything to them. Amidst all the commotion, Void asked the teacher for permission to go on alone. To Elemi, Void seemed much calmer than all the other students. Void's request was denied. As Lily had said earlier, they could be attacked by magical creatures. Even if they didn't die, they had to be prepared to suffer injuries at the very least. Ignoring Lily with a pompous expression on his face, Void stood his ground. He began to play on her pity, saying that he hadn't teamed up with anyone and asking her not to lump him in with all the losers. He didn't want to babysit them. Hearing his complaint, Lily once again instructed him to team up with those who had teamed up yesterday and not to forget to call her sensei. Void was extremely dissatisfied, and he asked why they were treating him like a child. Calling it a scourge, Sensei repeated her request. Meanwhile, Miku suggested that just the 2 of them go together. Elemi couldn't believe his ears. Did she really want to team up with him? He asked her about it uncertainly. Pressing herself against his cheek, the girl replied yes, saying she was counting on him and liked his soft cheeks. Elemi didn't like this at all. He demanded that she back off and not transfer her scent onto him. Moving away from him a little, blushing, Miku noticed and suggested that he relax more in her room. Elemi shouted. Turning away from her with a frown, he continued to be indignant in his thoughts. You can only be nasty on the battlefield. And anyway, what was she saying to a 10-year-old child? Leaning close to his face again, the girl began to turn his face toward her with her hand, sticking out her tongue to lick it. Elemi yelled at her not to go too far. This was too much. Mika made excuses. She said he looked delicious. Breaking free from her grip, Elemi ordered her to stop. It was unbearable. In order to break free, Elemi pushed her face away with his hands. In response, the girl told him that she was cold. Miku resorted to manipulation. Laughing, she leaned toward him and said that if he didn't stop, she would tell everyone about his secret. With a look of anger on his face, the boy was disgusted. Besides, if they found out he was a prince, he wouldn't be able to participate in the curriculum. Teasing him, the girl repeated herself. Shouting at the top of his lungs, Elemi asked her to behave a little more restrained. At that moment, his classmates were standing nearby and saw everything perfectly well. They began to build theories. One of them was puzzled and said in amazement, at such a young age and already flirting with her. Another was jealous. He also wanted to pinch his cheeks. Without drawing attention to himself, Elemi looked around. Among all the students, two had not yet paired up. These students were Ryoka and Void. Elemi was insanely curious. Were they unable to find a group? Or did they not even try in the first place? Although, when you think about it, Miku and Elemi were just two people short. Approaching them, the sensei thought it was perfect. Ituka immediately gave the order to team up with Ryoka and Void. This was what Elemi feared. He immediately responded that it was unnecessary. Void wasted no time in disparaging his future comrades, calling them unpleasant. He had no desire to join forces, especially, as he put it, to look after young aristocrats. Ryoka also spoke up, explaining why he didn't need companions. His argument was his good knowledge of fencing. True, he said, neither in Breeze's class nor from the famous warrior sensei. Somewhat surprised, Void found similarities with Ryoka. He also did not want to team up with a model student like him. Ryoka did not respond. Turning his head in his direction, he noticed his calm disregard and asked, "Bold, aren't you?" Unable to tolerate the growing conflict, the sensei sternly said that she would not repeat herself a third time. The two of them would join Miku's team. If they didn't want to, they wouldn't participate. The boys were stunned with shock. Elemi, standing in Miku's embrace, was impressed by Lily's intimidation. Even he, as a former holy swordsman, was frightened. With a sly smile, he analyzed the situation and almost cried. That must be the difference between his current state and Lily's skills. Void did not hide his irritation, and Ryoka supported him. Elemi tensed slightly. They couldn't work as a team, and that was problematic. Ituka continued to dictate the rules. Inside the dungeon, it was permissible to walk as a class or in groups at the discretion of the students. There must be at least 4 people in a group. No credit would be earned if there were fewer people, so they had to be careful. If anyone was injured, everyone had to help. The teachers had already eliminated all dangerous monsters. According to the sensei, the only creatures left were the magical ones brought in by the teachers. There shouldn't be any problems. Even so, Ituka insisted on remaining vigilant. Everyone shouted in unison, yes. Inspired by the task, Ituka excitedly babbled about the goal. The goal was to find ancient hieroglyphs engraved on an iron door at the bottom of the 3rd floor. Ituka, trembling with excitement, prepared the first-year students of Class 1 of the Royal Knight Academy for the start of the trial. The class stuck together and slowly moved forward. It was scary, and they couldn't see anything. Should they go forward? Void boldly said that he would go check the stairs leading down to the 2nd floor. Elemi walked to his right and said, well, paying attention to the echo, and, judging by that, it seemed that they would be walking in one direction for a long time. Suddenly, a huge monster appeared out of nowhere. The monster was made of stones, and neither its eyes nor its mouth were visible. Ryoka, standing behind, was frightened. Void and Elemi stood calmly. Elemi wasn't sure, but the monster looked like a golem. It moved straight and slowly. Pulling out his weapon, Void shouted, "Let's do this," and rushed into battle. In a matter of seconds, the guys defeated the golem. They were very happy with their victory. Only Elemi was not happy about the victory. He felt uneasy because these were easy opponents. He had a hunch that perhaps this was done to make them feel more confident. Miku found the entrance to the 2nd level. Void said on the run that he would go there first. Miku shouted that it was unfair. But things were not as simple as they seemed. A new monster appeared in the doorway. The monster was in the form of a naked girl with large pointed ears. Seeing this, the guys backed away. Void asked if it was a golem. Leaving the question unanswered, an interesting question arose in Elemi's mind. The question was whether the teachers were testing how they would kill a humanoid. He mentally said no, as he noticed something interesting. Magical creatures should not have free will, but this one did. Elemi realized that something was wrong. Frightened for a second, he tugged at Miku's jacket and urged her not to run. Miku stood motionless, her face frightened, and the only thing she could say was how dire their situation was. Recognizing his friend's state, Elemi smiled slyly. In Elemi's opinion, this monster was just an ordinary girl, but his perception of the situation forced him to change his mind. His intuition did not fail him. It was evil. Staring at the monster, Void wondered what it was. The boy asked everyone. It must be another magical creature prepared by the teachers, right? Without waiting for a response from the others, the student rushed into battle with confidence. Swinging his sword and jumping on the monster, he struck its paw with all his might. Luck was not on his side. The monster's hand was immediately covered with scales, and it seemed that such a deadly blow should have killed the monster, but there was only a scratch on its hand. Before he could even squeak, the monster grabbed him and delivered a powerful blow to his stomach. The student lay there, choking on blood, tears streaming down his cheeks. Everyone gathered around him. Miku sat on her knees and asked how he was feeling. He tried to say something, but because blood was coming out of his mouth, he couldn't. Elemi realized that it was a fatal wound that had damaged vital organs. If they just left him there, he would die. Meanwhile, the monster was approaching. Noticing this, the students began to scream and hysterically ask what it was. Running away only made things worse. Elemi shouted, calling them stupid and ordering them not to turn their backs on the monster. The students did not listen. Elemi followed them and hysterically asked them how serious they were. They were going to be attacked. Everyone ran in panic, and the monster struck the center of the crowd with maximum intensity. A huge hole formed, and the students fell into it. Elemi sat on the stone blocks and understood perfectly well that they had fallen. But how did it happen? Mika stood slightly above the boy and replied that it wasn't just 2 floors. Elemi was stunned. Elemi saw how Miku reduced the force of inertia during the fall, throwing debris aside. Elemi was frightened by her ability. Looking for the creature, Elemi asked where the monster was. Miku explained that she hadn't seen it and that it might have been frightened and run away during the crash. The student summed up the creature's misfortune. Even so, Elemi examined the location. The structure of the dungeon had changed. The first floor was a natural dungeon, but the floor they were on was artificial. Most likely, the teachers had no idea about this, Elemi decided. Standing up, Elemi explained that he had no idea that something like this existed in the vicinity of Lian, near the royal capital. Addressing Kilpis as His Majesty, he immediately corrected himself and continued his thought. If His Majesty found out, he would be furious. Miku agreed. According to Breeze's knowledge, everything had been preserved, and there should have been an artificial staircase leading upstairs. Miku asked if he was hurt. Elemi replied that he was not, and added that he had barely been touched. Miku was delighted and said that he was lucky. When he got up, Void gasped and showed his anger. He couldn't believe that students had to learn in such a scenario. Mika literally jumped up and rejoiced. He responded and said that he was not that skilled, and apparently lost consciousness. When asked how much time had passed, he immediately received the answer: a couple of minutes. In turn, Miku didn't like Ornheim's address and asked him not to call her that. Void remained silent. In addition to their group, there were several other girls and boys. Looking around, Elemi assumed that no one had died, only been injured. In addition, there was a guy who, judging by his appearance, didn't have long to live. Void said how lucky this guy was to survive, but it was because of him that the whole class was put in danger. Elemi ordered them to stop, excusing him. He said it was an inevitable encounter. Void noted the boy's kindness. Elemi did not appreciate the nickname. The boy's inner voice agreed with the statement. Judging by the damage to his organs, this guy was lucky not to die. But did someone save him? Was there someone under him? Leaving the questions unanswered, his gaze turned to Void. Elemi asked if he was hurt. Void pointed to the scratches as an answer. Perhaps he got them when he was wiping away sweat. Elemi approached just as Void was wiping his face. The picture was as follows. The monster struck, a hole formed, and as he fell onto the artificial floor, Void put himself under him so that the guy wouldn't die. Seriously? Who is truly kind now? Void looked around and said that he only saw one stranger. A voice behind them said that this stranger was, of course, him. Ryoka came out to them, and Void asked about his condition. Watching this scene, Elemi thought about Ryoka's ability to get out of trouble, as he didn't have a single scratch on him. He said not to worry, as he was just looking around. Void replied, "That makes sense." In response, Ryoka asked why he wasn't worried, calling him wounded. Smiling, he didn't understand what Ryoka meant by that. Void approached the group and gave the order to wait. He said he was going to look around. Elemi wanted to go with him, but he was told to stay. The wounded needed care. Void added that Elemi would be a burden to him. Elemi became angry. Ryoka sat down next to the boy, stroking his hair, smiling and inspiring trust, convincing him of the need to find a way out, and during his absence asked him to take care of Miku and the wounded. Elemi listened attentively. However, this did not improve the situation. Even more angry, he did not understand what they had against children. Still, Elemi resigned himself. The group of students immediately headed for the breach. Calling out to the sensei, they received no response. Meanwhile, Miku and Elemi remained sitting by the wall. The girl asked if he considered this to be part of the program. In Elemi's opinion, it was too much for a class, considering that the natural underground had turned out to be an unknown, artificial one. In response, he said he was 9 out of 10 sure that what had happened was accidental. Even if it was a coincidence, Miku hoped the sensei would come. Suddenly, Miku became curious. Would she have lost to this creature? Elemi answered her question with a question. Did she have a chance? She is a warrior princess. Miku wasn't sure. According to her, she would have faced a creature capable of breaking the floor with its bare hands. In Elami's mind, this was also true. In his past life, he himself had never encountered such a powerful monster. Enraged, the inner voice concluded by calling the student stupid and advising her to remain in that state. Mika noticed his anger. Miku, without hesitation, asked if he liked older girls that much. Elami did not give a definite answer, although, in terms of mental age, he certainly did. After listening, Miku concluded that he was simply at an age when he still missed his mother's breast. Elami replied, maybe. The girl was shocked. He didn't even deny it, and that made her wonder, was he an adult or a child? Since that was the case, Miku grabbed her chest and called him over with a question. Did you want to touch them? Elami refused. Miku continued to smile. Elami was a little scared of her, although he himself did not realize why he was so afraid of her. What was the reason? Mika suddenly changed the subject. She stood up and looked into the distance with a frightened expression on her face. One of the girls wandering around the dungeon started calling for the sensei. Another girl ran up to her and covered her mouth, asking her not to scream. Then she pointed to a dark passageway. A monster with a club was moving out of the passageway and speaking in an incomprehensible language. It was a mystery to everyone what language it was. The monster approached the students closely. Behind him, the number of creatures rapidly increased many times over. The monsters were coming straight at them. Elami realized that they were goblins. The monsters heard them calling for help. Thanks for watching. Write your feedback in the comments. If you like the story, please like and subscribe. See you soon.